Video 29. In the last video, I basically arrived at the conclusion that the world is going to evolve into the Anthropocene, but only at the rate in which ideas can evolve in relation to real systems, those being social or economic or political or whatever. So the question of this video is, are all the ideas in the world created in relation to some kind of reality? And there is a reason why questioning over how to do things is linked to the question over what the world system really is. And we can see the way this correlates with, as I said before, the model that we have of the universe, solar system and stars. So that is that we can actually keep track of the way the whole ideas process has evolved as a whole. And the way I'm going to show this is by going back to an old philosophical question, and one which became very particular in the 1800s after Hegel said that we could understand every event in society from history, meaning that global society as a whole works in a certain way in terms of the way the structure of the ages that we live in change, in his philosophy of history, which is the dialectical principle of the thesis, the synthesis, and the antithesis, which is basically the fact that the thesis, or the idea that we propose in society at a particular time, then leads to the system moving forward, by which it encounters its own antithesis, and the resulting interaction between the two becomes a synthesis that leads to the next stage. And then the same things happens again. So whatever the thesis is, then that's the way things evolve over time. So for example, in ancient Egypt, the thesis is the Egyptian society, and then the antithesis became the empires of Mesopotamia. And then the synthesis became this kind of state of affairs where Egypt and Mesopotamia became the first two cradles of civilization. So it sounds very simple, and it is really. Ultimately, it's just that the picture is very big, and you've got to understand which sections of events to actually look at in order to understand the way things have progressed. But sometimes it's easy. For example, then you've got the Persian Empire. So the thesis being the world order as it is evolving at the time. And then the Persians have a big rebellion through starting with the Medes tribes in the Zagros Mountains to the east of Mesopotamia, who invade the whole of Mesopotamia. And then this produces the new thesis, which is a multicultural empire in which all its nations keep order on their own, but it is essentially a religious empire. And then this triggers off a war with Greek democracy when they try to take over the Ionian Isles after having moved through Turkey. So the Greek Western democracy, which has already passed through the phase of having Socrates and Plato as their philosophers, and Aristotle, who came after them, taught Alexander the Great, who then invaded Persia. And then the new thesis becomes the Greek Empire, which conquers the Persian religious empire. So this goes on all the way through the ages. We have the European world economy, for example, as the thesis, and then its antithesis becomes communism, which becomes the Soviet Union, which becomes the Cold War. And then the next stage becomes the mixed economy. Then we have the problem of terrorism, and then this leads to the multipolar environment. So now we have the problem with the multipolar environment in the Ukraine war, and that's triggered off all kinds of directions in itself, including the Israel-Hamas crisis. So we're in the middle of that now. Something else Hegel said was, what is real is rational, what is rational is real. As where else would we get an idea from if it was not related to a reality of some sorts? The only question really is how we got here. And how we can work this out may seem a bit like a detective would solve a crime. So imagine a fictitious universe which is entirely different to our own, in which an entirely different set of characters exist from the ones which exist today. We could not create the idea of those characters in our minds without the idea of characters. So that is the dynamics and personalities inherent in living characters which are alive now. Even if we created an interdimensional portal within that universe, out of which emerged a category of things called that which we have not yet known, what things would come out of it. Because we can't create something out of nothing, if we were to step into this portal, then we'd just find ourselves floating in a void. Then we would have to redesign the structure of the matter itself, which was created at the start of the universe, to give us an entire universe which was a different shape and in which events had taken on a different form. But then even if we can imagine the events in that universe, they would still be made out of the fact that we had imagined ourselves traveling through our own imaginary world to a different universe and then stepping through this portal. So, in other words, the theory has it that we're still making ideas out of the category of things known as that which we already know. So, however we use ideas, we cannot, just as we cannot taste food which we haven't eaten or fall into a hole in the ground which isn't there, we have ideas in our mind, and that is, we must build every idea that we create out of the ideas that we already know. So just as the physical world does, we realize that basically, even if we enter into pure metaphysics and attempt to create just our own rules for it, then we still actually find ourselves abiding by a similar set of rules to the physical plane, but just on that level of the mind. Over time then, humans are remarkably similar in the sense that if we are not asking questions about the fundamental nature of reality, then we're asking questions about the nature of existence, and so periodically we ask the same question, which is, what is the universe? And so at each stage we must quantify what we've learned since we last asked that question, so to have further clarified our overall knowledge. When we started, we did not know if the Earth went around the sun, but now we think we know the age of the universe, and so the new question becomes then, out of what did the universe arise? And while not having answered the first question fully yet, what is the universe? Then we can see the idea's process as an evolving thing. Maybe one day when we know enough about how matter was created, then we can imagine how an alternative universe might function in its entirety. But for now, if we must accept, and I think rationally then we must, as we can know where we are now in terms of what we actually know, and admit then what we don't know, then we must see that all the ideas which exist now must relate to something real, as we're not at the point where we can actually create other universes. And so we must see that all the ideas which exist now must relate to something real and not something created out of how we might conceive of an alternative universe, as we don't know for sure that we can understand how they function. So, however, what this means is that we're able to order the ideas that we have in our heads, at least into categories related to the way the situation has evolved. And that means now, this is why we're doing this stuff with the categorization of the periods of history in terms of the Holocene and its ages, and then kind of not just why, but how the Anthropocene is coming into existence as that idea is now evolving. So this invokes the manifest universe that we live in the present, which we can know as being real, as we can see from the overview of the way all the parts of it coexist and operate in relation to each other, which we can see is true from the way events occur, even though we might say in one place that the ideas there are entirely relative. They're not completely relative, they're only relative in the way that the situation's evolved. So people must realize that philosophy and the way it changes through the ages first started out questioning basic things about nature, but now goes as far as to discuss the nature of the reality out of which we make ideas, as we are conscious beings forced to use, analyze, dissect, and reinterpret the ideas from our environment, just as we make food from our available resources, or choose what to wear from the clothes that we own, or make friends from our currently available circle of acquaintances. Over time, somebody must inform the direction ideas are going in by creating narratives which make them better understood as pathways to knowing particular things, and help people discern what it is they want to know about the world. So in other words, we redefine ideas by redefining logic, And it's the job of scientists, philosophers, sociologists, governments, people like that, to do all that. But there has to be a balance in terms of the way that the situation evolves, so that one person cannot define everybody's ideas for themselves. So one thing we can all do, if we want to be truly independent in terms of the way that we think, then we all have to know the history of the ages, how events led to the postmodern age, why the shift to the Anthropocene must inevitably occur due to the fact that the ideas process must progress and it can neither stay still nor go backwards. So what we need really is more a way of updating ourselves on what's happening, rather than just learning about what's happening, which is the state that a lot of people seem to be in, where they're happy if they read a few books and they're happy doing that, then that's okay. But they're not really, unless they actually arrive at a point where they can actually understand how things work in general, then they're not going to be able to create a model for themselves that allows them to update themselves as they go, and they're going to be forever trapped in the learning process. So it is a simple model, really. But I know that when we often actually let others solve the problems for us in terms of making progress, then our contribution to one or other field of activity is what we have to make ourselves an equal part of the process of evolution as a whole. And that enables people to obviously commit themselves to a kind of direction in terms of learning. So perhaps what's changing is that we're developing a need not to get trapped in that. And really, if we consider the whole process of human evolution, the questions over which paradigms should take on board and embody are directly related to where we are in terms of what direction we must find for ourselves, then we must realize that it's the only way to really find freedom in a conscious sense, by working our way towards it and basically not robbing a bank or something. So because the Anthropocene implies equality, it means that we must all deal with the issue of the age. And that means the UN system and the Security Council and the framework of nations, if we are to understand the people who live on the earth at this time. And I'd say this was the next big step really in the evolution of human consciousness, in the sense that people are thinking now, okay, if we can only just get over this now, if we can only just all work it out, then we can all interact in the way that we want to, and we're effectively living on a shared earth as a species, and we're no longer living in these kind of social systems which represent the fact that people don't understand what's happening and they need a kind of higher class of people to rule over them, because they're never going to be able to really make conscious decisions for themselves. So otherwise people are going to be found ignorant of that, which people who may stand above us could use really the fact that they may perceive our ignorance through measurable criteria and say that they must make the rules for us, when we can all see that this is really not an option that everybody can commit themselves to, and it's really the product of the way that we're actually evolving over time. So eccentric though this may all seem, we can't all be part of the upper classes or the lower classes, but we can all be part of a democracy. And this implies really that we all have to shift over to the four-dimensional way of seeing the world, which is still pretty invisible to a lot of people. And we say they cannot see the wood for the trees, or rather, if you've been following the information in this channel, then you'll see for yourself that the ideas which pervade our world relate to the way the world works at a time when we must at least create the ability to stop being trapped in the three-dimensional world of the way that events were created by the Holocene, or just simply the shape of global society as it evolved. If we're to see ourselves functioning correctly and see the things going on in the world that the 4D way, the Anthropocene, implies. In the next video, I'll be going back to the big picture and looking at how events actually transpire In the meantime, please like, share and subscribe to this channel for further updates.